On behalf of the Deignan Institute for Earth and Spirit, I'm so very happy to welcome you to a vow of conversation that we are having this afternoon with our really exceptional guest artist, Angela Manno, about whom we'll say more as this introduction unfolds. But first, let me welcome all of you. Let me welcome all the Gale students who are signing in to this conversation, and all of our friends from the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue. And it is my joy, really, to just express my real happiness in welcoming an exceptional artist, Angela Manno. And I'd like to say that Angela is exceptional for a number of reasons, not simply because she has an exquisite talent, which will be on display for us, but because, as we've been saying during her visit to us, she comes to us at a moment when we are being reminded by the panel, the United Nations panel on climate change, that we have reached another alarming moment of crisis for our planet. And so it is a time for each and every single one of us to learn to see in a radically new and profound way. And Angela Manno is an artist who I feel has arisen in our midst at just this perfect moment when we need to have a seer aid us in seeing what is really real and what is really happening. Angela, as she will help us to understand as we engage her in her story, is an iconographer of endangered and threatened species. And it is her gift to summon us before these icons so that we can behold the saving beauty of these extraordinary creatures. So if I may, before I introduce Angela, if I can introduce my colleague and the Associate Director of the Deignan Institute for Earth and Spirit, who is Dr. James Robinson. James is a theologian from the Religious Studies Department here at Iona University, and he is the curator, so to speak, of our creation-centered and environmental-centered courses in the theology department. And of course, the joy is to welcome you, Angela. Thank you. To welcome Angela, who is, like James and myself, who is a student of, disciple of Father Thomas Berry, who called himself a geologian. He remains, he was the master of the emerging ecozoic age, a new age for our planet. A new age for those of us who will heed this call to give ourselves to the great work of building a new and sustainable civilization. So, Angela, welcome. Thank you for being here. Tell us something of what is your story. What brought you to the creation of these exceptional icons of beauty?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for coming. Can you hear me all right? All right. Well, I started off as a professional artist, and I became fascinated with just the materials that icons were made from, egg tempera and gold leaf on wood. So I thought I would find a class where I could learn to use the medium. And I got more than I bargained for, because I found out about a course being taught by a master iconographer from Russia who was teaching in the Byzantine Russian style, like traditional icons. So I studied with him for about 6 months, but what happened was it was a lot more than the materials. I got completely captivated by the symbolism and the teachings that go hand in hand with learning how to use the medium. That's what's so wonderful about iconography. But at a certain point, I felt a little constrained by the imagery in the traditional iconography, because it was human-centered, and nature was always in the backdrop. So having been an informal student of Thomas Berry for a while, and just with my knowledge of ecology and my love of the natural world, I felt that I needed to bring the natural world forward and center. So I thought that what I needed to do, and it's also to expand the existing canon of traditional iconography. Of course, I don't know if these would ever be accepted, in the Orthodox tradition. But for myself, I felt I needed to do that. So that's how it started. The first image I did actually was an image of the Earth from space, of the whole Earth, to show it as a bio-spiritual entity, because we're not only material, we're also a spiritual planet. And then I started to hear about the mass extinction crisis, and felt that I needed to move into that. So that's how it started.
So wonderful.
Yeah.
And let us just say, we have the delight of being with some of our students here, and we welcome all of you. And we want to let you know that this exhibition, through the Institute for Earth and Spirit, and especially the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue, are initiatives within our university that are for you. They are for you. They are for your cultivation and your education and your empowerment as you mature into this very critical moment of Earth history. Let me turn to my colleague and ask Dr. Robinson to explore with Angela Manno some more.
So I have a couple questions, Angela. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your initial encounter with Thomas Berry, and then kind of your ongoing exploration of his work. Do you recall when you first encountered him or his work?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
yes. So I actually was working on an anthology that I was gathering essays and commissioning essays and doing interviews with people who I felt were the architects of a sustainable human presence on the planet. And I had heard of Thomas Berry, and I asked him if he would write an essay. I first wrote to him, and then when I actually met him, it was in Brian Swim's class out at the Creation Spirituality Center. Is that at CIIS? And it, the rest is history, because Thomas really loved my work in that he saw what I was doing, even though I had created this particular work, which was the preceded the icons. But we were on the same track. So we started to meet every week, actually, we had, when he was still up in Riverdale, and we would
Okay.
have lunch together at
Wow.
the diner. And it was like he was cultivating me, you know? And I'm sure you know what he was like, and he would repeat certain things so that to make sure that I got it.
Mm.
And one of them was, you mentioned it yesterday about we're not a collection of objects, we're a communion of subjects. He would repeat that to me. But yeah, we were, you know, up until his death in 2009. Yeah, we were in contact.
Can we follow that thread a little bit further? So you mentioned the quote, right, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Can you talk about your understanding of that quote and how your understanding of that quote comes through in these icons that we're surrounded by?
And there is a very important little coda on the end of his teaching. We are not a collection of objects for human use.
Right. Right. And he always used to say, the worst thing we could have is a use relationship with things. And that's what we have today. You know, we were talking earlier about, what's it, ecosystem services. Is that the right word? In other words, all of these beings, their utility for us, you know, they probably have assigned a monetary value to all this. But I see all of these beings as subjects in their own right with their intrinsic value. And what Thomas used to say is every being has rights to existence, to habitat, and to fulfill their role within the community of beings.
So powerful.
Yeah.
And beautiful.
Yeah.
Could we talk a little bit more about your understanding of that concept of intrinsic value or inherent value and how that's different from instrumental value?
Yeah.
And maybe how your project is inspired by a sensitivity to the inherent or intrinsic value of all of these creatures.
Well, you said it best. I mean, the intrinsic value is that they have value in and of themselves, not just their usefulness to humanity. And if we look at any one of these and the peril that they're in, it all has to do with our use relationship, either directly or indirectly. So the frog over here.
Yeah.
Because they have such permeable skins, they are more vulnerable to all of the pollutants and things that we heap upon them. So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question.
You know, I'm just so aware, having you in our presence, that it is the special vocation or the special gift of the artist to have an acute sensitivity to beauty. And especially a fine artist, things come in through the eyes. And I'm just so aware that many, many of us are, you know, we're denizens of the urban environment. We do not live in the wild. We probably have had little experience of the wild where we might have gone exploring and discovering. But it takes an artist with your sensitivity, Angela, and the gift that you have to bring forward for us, to take from hiding, and also to take from their critical environments and set them in these iconic, what do I want to say, tableaus, so that we can really, really see the beauty that you see, and that you've spent probably hours and hours on every single one of these creatures, getting to know them and letting them become more and more manifest through you. My work at the Institute for Earth and Spirit has a lot to do with transformation. How are we going to transform our human nature from a mode, as Thomas Berry would say, of destructiveness to a mode of mutually abiding communion with these creatures? So I care an awful lot about falling in love with these creatures, because as Father Thomas says, we will not save what we don't love. And we will not love what we do not gaze upon and look upon.
And what we do not understand is something else. I mean, I do feel that it's necessary. How can we save the earth or any species if we don't understand how it works? So it takes both, the love and the understanding. And when you mention the arts, as many people probably have heard the expression art for art's sake, that's over 100 years old. And I think that its time is, past, because now I believe that art needs to be socially engaged and address the issues of the age, so that artists can elicit emotions, which you don't get from the scientists, who will give us percentages and statistics and all that kind of stuff, and people start to just feel paralyzed. But I think emotions really do open the floodgates to action. And so we shouldn't be afraid of our emotions. We should honor them, because we're part of the ecosystem, and if we're distressed about it, we should be, because we're all connected. And I would just want to give a shout out to what's going on today across the country, is an action where people of a certain age are going to banks and telling them that they're going to take their money out of the banks that are subsidizing, or rather investing in fossil fuel projects. So there's love, there's understanding, and there's action. Those three, I think, are what's needed, the formula.
Yeah.
The good formula.
I love that, Angela, and I think your work builds very strongly on Thomas Berry's understanding that we need to weave together science and religion, right, in order to cultivate this holistic sense of our presence in the wider community of life and our responsibilities to that community, that we've got to engage the senses, we've got to engage the emotions. We also have to cultivate this deep empirical knowledge, that they weave together, right? The more deeply we know about the world at an empirical level, and the more deeply we can celebrate and revere the world as a sacred reality, that will transform us. That will transform our relationship. And you're weaving in art, right? So that you're fleshing out this vision of aesthetics, of beauty, that is inherently linked to ethics, right? And that can weave together with science, I think with religious insights, right? But then bringing in the centrality of beauty especially. And I wonder if we could talk about this particularly, so the title of your piece, Saving Beauty, right? Even just starting with that opening phrase. And I heard you reflect on this earlier, that you're using that phrase in two ways, right? So that, in a sense, we're invited to save the beauties that surround us, but then beauty is also saving us, right? So there's this kind of reciprocal relationship where we're saving and being saved, right? And I hear resonances, for instance, with Dostoevsky's
Right.
statement, beauty will save the world, right? But who will save beauty, right? So any thoughts on that, just that kind of reciprocal relationship between us saving beauty and then beauty saving us?
Well, I can say that whenever I'm somewhere that a natural setting that's completely intact,
Mhm.
I feel saved, I feel healed, I feel redeemed. And the word saved comes from the Latin salus, which means to heal and to save.
Yeah.
So if we don't save those places, we can't be saved by beauty, you know?
Yes.
And I think the more alienated and the more those places of beauty disappear, we're losing the opportunity to actually
Yeah.
be reborn, because that's what happens when you go into nature. At least for myself, you know, you go for a walk and you come back and you're just revitalized.
Yeah.
And those places are receding, and every one of these animals and plants are losing their home, you know. And people even lose their homes now under, what is that called? The,
Climate
it's called,
refugees.
no, when it's a law, you know, when something is deemed.
Eminent domain?
Yes, that's it, eminent domain.
Right.
People are losing, and you just look at all the indigenous people that are
Yeah.
losing. The ones who were on the they're the last stronghold of pristine ecosystems, like the rainforest, and you know what happened at Standing Rock, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say that it's a two-way street, saving beauty and beauty saving us.
It reminds me, too, of a quote from Barry. So he had this insight, you know, I mean, he was grounded in the Catholic tradition. He was a Catholic priest. And he was attuned to the sacraments, the 7 sacraments of the church, as well as the broader sacramental quality of creation, that we can encounter God in every facet of the natural world. But he made this point about water. He said, if we keep polluting our waterways, we will no longer have baptism. Right? So if you think about this at a quite literal way, right? Beauty saves us, we save beauty. We can think about it sacramentally. We can think about this in the frame of a variety of religious traditions,
Yeah.
right? Where we're really talking about being saved. This isn't just, you know, an abstract
Abstraction.
concept. It's a spiritual reality. It-
I'm trying to recall something that one of the Lenape people had said about we can no longer pray because nature has been desecrated. I can't remember. If I find the quote, I'll let you know, because I did use it once in one of my classes. So, but that's another example that it's so important to indigenous people.
For sure.
The land itself is sacred.
Yes.
And it's good that you invoke the Lenape people, because we at Iona University are now the custodians and the caretakers of the land on which they once thrived and lived. And we acknowledge that. I wonder, how long did it take, for example, for you to create one of these exquisite, breathtaking creatures as icon?
Well, some of them go fairly quickly, like maybe within 10 days, but some of them will take 6 weeks to more, and it's really depending on the level of detail, I think. And there are 2 drying periods. One is for the egg tempera paint to dry, and then there's another period of, you put linseed oil on it at the end, and that takes a while to dry. And this one just about made it into the show because it was drying up until the last minute.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm just aware that, again, as somebody who's preoccupied in my own life and in my ministry about how shall the human be faithful to our ongoing evolution and our ongoing vocation, so to speak, as the celebrants of this planet and the celebrants of this universe. We are to be its caretakers and its priests, if you will. And your icons make me want to literally fall on my knees, not just before each of these, but fall on my knees to discover the minute miracles that are happening all over the place in my world, between the cracks of the asphalt of my urban dwelling. And to know that taking this long, loving look at the real, which is what contemplation is, right? Is going to humanize me in a new way, in a different way. Because as we keep saying, Father Thomas keeps saying, we have to reimagine the human. We cannot continue to live with this level of destructive, avaricious kind of energy that we have. I feel, Angela, that your icons are these transformational presences for us. You know, how many of us have spent summers maybe, or a lot of money to go to Italy, for example, to see the icons of Giotto, to see the paintings, the murals, to see beautiful, beautiful art. We create these monuments or these temples to art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, just so that we can stand in front of these things and have them activate something of my deeper potential to come forward. I pray, here's some prayer I'm putting on you. I pray that your icons will last as long as the icons of Giotto, the images, the murals, so that when these creatures have passed, as they will, many of them, that's why you're painting them. And we know evolution is a one-way direction. They cannot come back. The conditions that brought them forth were a once-in-a-universe kind of moment. But I pray that we'll be able to see the glory of this moment that we still abide in through your icons.
Well, I hope they persist, but I do have to say that the reason why I create them is not to memorialize them. It is to move people, to care for them. In my mind, none of them are necessarily going to be extinct, only if we let it. So, you know, my mission is to have people fall in love with these critters, and also, I don't know if anybody knows this, but I give 50% from the sale of these to organizations like the Center for Biological Diversity, the Half Earth Project, the Pangolin Project, the Orangutan I forget what they're called exactly, but anyway, the point is that these people can do a lot more than I can as an individual. So I'm sort of diversifying my impact by having something like that happen. But I really don't count any of these guys as, definitely going extinct. I don't, I mean, the orangutan, for instance, they're saying it'll be extinct in the wild in 10 years because of so much of their habitat being destroyed. They've got nowhere else to go. But yeah, maybe I'm a dreamer, but I do feel, well, for instance, the gray wolf. When I did this icon, it was in a lot worse shape than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Or the candy darter, it just won 370 linear acres or whatever you call it, of streams, so that they can survive. Before they didn't have it, so a lot of these creatures, and there's so much awareness now about bees. And I don't know about you, but I know so many people that are creating these pollinator gardens, and they're getting rid of their lawns, and they're putting stuff. And I just think that the whole idea of like changing consciousness and coming into a new era is to have hope and to believe in your own agency. And so that's what I want to bring to people. That, yeah. Because the thing about, the universe story, we're part of a creative universe, right? It's always creating. And so are we, because we're a reflection of that. So let's get creating,
Yeah. I love your emphasis on hope and holding on to hope. One of the students who was in here for an earlier session, that was his major takeaway from looking at these various icons, was this sense of hope, right? And it reminds me of a quote from Barry. He says that, he uses a slightly different word than hope, but he says we need to pair a sense of alarm about the present as we consider the gravity of our ecological crisis, with a sense of fascination about the future that is available to us, right? So holding those two together, right? A sense of alarm, like the alarm is going off, we've got to respond, right? With a sense of fascination about a future that is open to us, so that we don't become frozen in fear and overwhelmed by the gravity of the crisis. So I think there's so much power in holding on to hope, right? Can you talk about some of the practices or ways that you hold on to hope?
By doing this.
Just by
It really is.
Yeah.
It's by just being exposed to these images and creating them. I mean, it is a contemplative act. It's just as contemplative as when I used to do the traditional icons and imagery. That's the thing that really grounds me.
Yeah.
And knowing that 50% is going to go somewhere,
Right.
So it's not just going to me. So yeah, and everyone has their part to play. If I can find that quote really quickly, here it is. That Thomas Berry loved to read about the great work. Let's see if I can find it. We all have our particular work. Some of us are teachers, some of us are healers, some of us are farming. We have a variety of occupations, but besides our particular work that we have and that we do, the particular lives we lead, we have a great work that everyone is involved in and no one is exempt from. The great work before us is the task of moving modern industrial civilization from its devastating influence on the earth to a more benign mode of presence. And I think that we we need to understand that this is the moment, this is the epoch we're moving into, where this is what's at stake, and it should feel good to each person that they're alive now, and that this is the opportunity to, no matter what you're doing, you can have an impact, and have it as much of an impact as you can, by joining with other people, or some people just drop. For instance, in my talk the other night, I talked about this woman, Julia Butterfly Hill, who spent 2 years in an old growth tree so it wouldn't be cut down. That's just one person. And they napalmed that tree, because the loggers really wanted to get at it. And she lived through like ice storms, and she stayed there for 2 years. So, and she didn't have a job at the time. She just saw it needed to happen, And so I think when the opportunity that we have right now really impresses itself upon you, that people can be very moved to do things beyond what they thought they could do. It's like there's something that happens with Olympic athletes, maybe you know this, is when they're doing a routine and then suddenly they get completely disoriented and they have to reset themselves almost. Because it's a complete breakdown. Somebody may know what the name, it's actually a phrase. And it's kind of like that's where we're at now.
Yeah. So we've got to reset. Yeah.
But we do have the inner resources, I guess that's the point. They dig really, really down.
Yeah.
Because they've reached the point of exhaustion to the point of disorientation. But they reach down to something that's there, that's still there. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. I think people are still too comfortable. So we all have those inner resources, more than we thought we have.
I feel that when I stand before your icons, or when I gaze upon them, I feel that something is activated in me to reset bigger, to reset deeper. I'm just so aware that a lot of us are fascinated by our ancestry. And especially, we're a pretty migratory species on the planet. And I think it's important for us to have a sense of where we come from and who our ancestors are or were, just so that we have a sense of continuity and belonging. And for me, these are my relations, whom I don't trace through Ancestry or 23andMe or one of those other services that help me trace my human lineage. But this is my organic, earthly lineage. Father Thomas will remind us that Brian Thomas Swim will remind us that I see with this particular kind of watery eye, because the species, the ocean species, the fish, within their moment of evolutionary creativity, generated an eye that then got passed on to other creatures, and other creatures climb up on land, go over to Ireland, and here I am with these eyes. There you are with your eyes. We have everything to thank these beings for. And, I think very much, James and I teach religious studies. We are cognizant of the extraordinary wisdom that abides among indigenous peoples. One goes to, for example, you could even go to this, at this moment, up to Alaska, and you can go to villages where there are totems, and communities live in this totemic world where animal beings, creatures of the sea, of the sky, of the earth, are the allies, are the teachers, are the wisdom characters that teach and humanize the human. And I think of that so much. I don't know about you, but I mean, I even have my own little totems. There are 3 creatures who, for me, are my teachers. And I honor them, even though I don't get to see them all the time. And one of them is the salmon. And it meant everything in the world to me to go to Alaska, to see a salmon run, to be there as they came around that planet with all of their energy to lay their eggs where they themselves had been spawned and then die. Wow, what is that about? I want that. I want that energy. I want that power.
Amen. Could you talk, Angela, a little bit more about the influence of Laudato Si on your work, or the connections that you trace between your work and Pope Francis's encyclical?
Well, Pope Francis, I love that. That is one of the greatest documents. If you haven't read it yet, it's really worth it. It's only like, I don't know, like 80 pages or something.
And it's beautifully written,
It's so
too.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of influence of Thomas Berry in there.
Mhm,
I'm sure you
mhm.
recognize it. And actually, one of the quotes from Laudato Si I have in here, as a matter of fact. Where is it? Well, it's something to the effect that all of these creatures give glory to God, and we have no right to silence them. And Thomas Berry has it, to wantonly destroy a living species is to silence forever a divine voice.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Laudato Si is it integrates the human being. And, so much of environmentalism today is, the humans are terrible and they should, if they should just go away, that the planet would be in a much better shape.
Right.
But that's because we don't know our role,
Mm-hmm.
so we're just messing everything up. But we're here for a reason,
Yeah.
And I like what Thomas, I'm going to go back to him because first of all, humans need to clean up their mess. That's number one. But what do you do after the mess is cleaned up? And he says it's to celebrate through dance and literature and art and so forth. So we're to be planetary celebrants. And actually that's what these are. It's a celebration too of and so, that comes into also ritual, like some of these practices, like a council of all beings, where people take on the identity of an animal that can't speak for itself and speaks for itself in a circle. It's really powerful. And so, I don't know if I'm getting off topic.
No,
That's
you're
great.
not.
Yeah.
But
This is what we were
I love, but Laudato Si. Oh, I'm going back to.
Yeah.
I was talking about the role of the human, and so I think that's what's new in the literature, is the role of the human.
Yeah.
Am I?
No,
do you
absolutely,
think-
yeah. The role of the human, and I think what Pope Francis does incredibly well in Laudato Si is he connects ecology with social justice, right? So he talks about an integral ecology, that we all need to flourish together.
Right.
Yeah,
And the idea of ecological conversion.
that's right.
And you know, just as you were speaking, Angela, this is something I was teasing my wonderful colleague James about today. My fantasy, if we could do this all over again, is that I would have us all arrayed in vestments. I would have at the door young men with huge, huge incensers inviting us into the room. And we would go around and we would bow and incense before each of the icons so that we were aware that we were standing before images of the sacred, as you know, images of God, imago Dei. It's in almost all of the traditions, as James rehearsed for us today. Everything has Buddha nature. Everything is a face and a facet of the divine splendor. But we don't see that anymore. And I think that's why Thomas kept saying, one of the jobs of this era is to reimagine religion as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have to generate a new kind of religious expression, celebration, such that we're not going into staid and static architectural structures that keep us in place and keep going over and over again, rituals that, unless we are profoundly awake and aware, so that we get to the bottom of them. But for most of us, it's rote. What if it were our play to, as I would love to have seen us do, is to have you maybe just put on my face, put on James's face, an image of my cousin, of my sister, of my brother, of that creature which I felt most intimate with, and for which I would be ambassador and ally and protector. I'd love to see that. I know we do that with tattoos, right? We do that sometimes, put a tattoo on us of something that we treasure. But how can we play into celebration more and more and more? I think it will take away our despondency and despair.
Yeah. Well, one possibility that we could consider, and this happened when we celebrated St. Francis Day. We had a procession featuring John Giuliani's icons, and Father Gerard blessed those icons with holy water. Right? So maybe we could invite Father Gerard into the gallery to be with these icons and maybe bless an icon.
And
Yeah.
don't let the water go anywhere
No,
near
they're
Yeah.
sealed. They've got linseed oil on them. They're fine. But you know, there is a whole liturgy for blessing icons.
Mm.
It exists, and I've had my traditional icons blessed in the church, and I don't see why that
Yeah.
couldn't happen.
I'd love to see our students create those rituals of blessing. How would you bless these icons? Oh, fair and lovely young ones who are inheriting the challenge to save all this beauty.
Do you know something that I was reminded of when you were talking about the images on your face? Have you ever seen that that slideshow on the side of the Vatican?
Yes.
Now that was
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of all the creatures, like whales, and there was sound too. I don't know how they did it, but it was so moving.
Yes.
And it really pissed some people off because, you know, there's still a very anthropocentric thread, you know, that thinks that this is idolatry, you know. But times are changing.
Yes.
And you can see that on YouTube if you wanted to go there and see the glorious light and sound show of creatures projected onto St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah. And I like your point, Angela, that times are changing. So, you know, a quote that jumps to mind for me that would definitely justify projecting, right, animal species onto, say, a building or a church at the Vatican comes from Laudato Si, where Pope Francis says, "The universe unfolds in God who fills it completely." And then he goes through this litany where he says, "Therefore there is mystical meaning to be found in a leaf, in a mountain trail, in a dewdrop." And then he brings it back to the human and he says, "In the face of a person experiencing poverty." Right? So
Wow.
he has sanctioned theologically our sanctification or our recognition of the sacred nature of this whole community of creation. I'm also reminded of the quote that you shared in your earlier talk from Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, my
Right? If you
favorite.
could share that again,
Yeah,
because this
yeah.
quote is actually featured on the gravesite of Father Thomas Berry. He has this quote
Is that
carved
right?
into his gravestone. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I think I
At
know it
Green
by heart,
Mountain
actually.
Monastery.
Yes, because the divine could not image itself forth in any one being, it created the great diversity of things, so that what was lacking in one would be supplied by the others, and the whole universe together would participate in and manifest the divine more than any single thing, any single being. And that's very eloquent. And then I've heard a, kind of a modern version, which I absolutely love. There's only one everything. And so when people think, we can dispense with this species probably because they're ignorant about what their role is, it really is everything. Everything needs to be saved.
Yeah.
Because we're not ourselves without everything else.
Everything needs to be saved, right? And also, I'm thinking of that MLK quote, "Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere."
Yep.
Right? So this whole web connects us. So everything needs to be saved and approached with reverence and respect, wonder and awe and care, right? And then we also need to recognize that to harm a particular species, right, like the orangutan or the gray wolf, right, or any of these species surrounding us, is to harm the whole web. Right? The whole web of creation, perhaps invisibly, but we can imagine it, lies behind each of these particular species. I think, so can I share a comment that came up in the chat? And I think this might
Please.
work well. So we touched on this earlier, but I think we can come back to this and flesh this out a little bit more. This comes from Sarah, and she says she's so curious about the gaze in icons, right? Our gazing at them gazing at us. And I remember Sister Kathleen on our Zoom last week, you connected this with a Hindu mystical practice called darshan, right? Which means to see and be seen by the divine. So this can happen with a guru, right? A living embodiment of divine presence, or it can happen with a statue or a sacred object, etc. But I just wonder, Angela, if you could reflect a little bit more on the power of the gaze itself as this kind of window into transformation. You're gazing at these species, them gazing back at you as you create these icons, and then you opening us up as the viewers to experience that gaze, that sense of seeing and being seen. Because a lot of these icons are looking back at us. Right?
Yes. Well, because of the process that I use, it's a layering process. And so it's as if the image is evolving.
Yeah.
And so, and I decide when it's done. Right? And when it's done, it's looking at you. It really is.
Wow.
And so I've had like a complete experience with them. And the other thing is then I start to see the similarity between scales and feathers and the structure of the eye of a salamander with a seahorse. And it's like, it's the whole genetic code just speaking a little bit differently in each being, you
Yeah.
know? That's another way of experiencing the interrelationships.
Yeah.
But, you know, some of them, they don't gaze at you, like the bees turning the other way. And I have to make some aesthetic decisions about
Sure.
that, too. And I wanted to show the whole bee, whereas if you know, you were kind of looking at them, you
Yeah.
wouldn't see much, you know?
Yeah.
So, but I think it comes through anyway.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. The essence is what counts, I think. You know, like even the kelp, you know, can't gaze at us.
That's right.
But, you know, its essence just radiates.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
You know, even seeing those, these documentaries of, I don't know if you've seen the sea lions or the seals swimming around the kelp forests and things. It's like they're beings in their own right, you know? And we don't confer that,
Yeah.
at least in, you know, most of the Abrahamic traditions, you know, we don't do that. But of course, you know, an indigenous religion. See, that's why I don't think we have to invent so much, is just kind of look at what they're doing or have done. I mean, some of the most important, like formative experiences I've had is, say, like doing a sweat lodge. And, you know, a traditional one.
Yeah.
I've done them out west when I was on the Indian reservation out there. It's a prayer that makes you so humble because you're in with the elements and the heat and the steam, and it's just, you have to pray
Yeah.
because it's so uncomfortable. And then you kind of reach another level. It's almost like what marathon runners talk about, you know, as they reach the wall and somehow go beyond it. Yeah.
That's beautiful and powerful.
And also, I just want to say that, you know, no religion is an organization. A living religion is an organism. And it's still alive, and it's still evolving. And that's where I take confidence in someone like Francesco, the Pope, who is really encouraging us to continue to allow in my religious experience, where I arise out of, the Christian tradition to continue to evolve.
That's what I wanted
Yeah.
to do with these, actually.
And to let Judaism continue to evolve. It's what our wonderful colleagues, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, have been doing in the Harvard series. Let each and every single religion awaken to their ecological dimension and phase. So we've got a wonderful, great work before us.
Absolutely.
And it has been beyond a gift to have you here. Perhaps before we conclude, we should ask you if you would like to say anything finally and ultimately to us.
Well, first of all, it's a great joy to see all of these pieces together and to be able to share them with everyone. And my greatest desire is really to change consciousness, because until we do that, we're gonna have like these fights, you know. Joanna Macy is a big influence on me, and she said, you know, we can have all kinds of protests and so forth. But if we don't change consciousness, it's just going to go on.
Yeah.
So that's my goal.
Yeah. And I think,
So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my work with you.
thank you,
Yeah.
Angela, seriously, and I think you're succeeding in that goal. And I think, too, I believe it was Einstein, at least this is attributed to him, that problems can't be solved by the same consciousness that created them. Right? So
Right.
we've got to get to the roots, the root cause of our crisis. I just want to close this Zoom session with a comment in the chat. This comes from Judy Emery, and she just offers this compliment to you, Angela. She says that your articulation of the value of creation seems to me so important that it is really a cosmic event.
Oh,
So, with that, I think we can close our Zoom. God bless everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
tuning in.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for your
being with us.
presence.
And thank you to the Iona University Arts Council for the grant that has allowed us to bring Angela here, and to all the collaborators of the Deignan Institute for Earth and Spirit who have worked so hard to bring this event forward. To my colleague James, and to you,
And to you
Angela.
too.
Thank you so
for your
much.
Thank you.
persistence.
Thank you. Thank you.